There's a moment when you're deep in the wilderness and the sun starts to set that you realize just how small you really are. The trees seem taller, the shadows longer, and every sound in the forest feels amplified. My name is Tyler, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get lost in the woods. I grew up in the suburbs, more comfortable with city parks and mountain trails. But after what happened to me last summer, I know that surviving a night in the wilderness is something you never forget. It started as a simple weekend trip with friends. We'd planned it for months, a 2-day hike in the Adirondacks, just 4 of us, all in our mid-20s and eager for an adventure. We packed our gear, checked the weather, and set out early on a Saturday morning. The trail was beautiful, winding through dense forests and along sparkling streams. We laughed, took pictures, and talked about everything and nothing. By late afternoon, we reached the spot where we planned to camp for the night, a small clearing by a lake, miles from the nearest road. We set up our tents, built a fire, and cooked dinner as the sun dipped below the trees. The air was cool and fresh, and for a while, everything felt perfect. After dinner, we sat around the fire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. It was one of those rare nights when you feel completely at peace, surrounded by friends and the quiet of the forest. Around midnight, I decided to go for a walk. I'd always loved the way the woods looked at night, the way the moonlight filtered through the branches. I told my friends I'd be back in a few minutes and set off down the trail with my flashlight. I didn't go far, just a few hundred yards from camp, following the path as it curved around the lake. I stopped to listen to the sounds of the night, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. That's when I heard something else. At first, it was just a faint crackling, like twigs snapping underfoot. I turned off my flashlight and stood still, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, until I was sure someone or something was moving through the trees nearby. My heart started to race. I called out, thinking it might be one of my friends, but there was no answer. The footsteps stopped, and the forest was silent again. I turned my flashlight back on and started to head back to camp, but the trail looked different in the dark. The trees all looked the same, and I couldn't see the lake anymore. I tried retracing my steps, but after a few minutes, I realized I was lost. I called out for my friends, but my voice was swallowed by the night. Panic set in. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I just needed to find the lake and follow it back to camp. But every direction looked the same, and the more I walked, the more lost I felt. My phone had no signal, and the battery was already low. I checked my watch. It was almost 1 a.m. I decided to stay put and wait for morning. I found a spot under a large tree, sat down, and tried to keep warm. The temperature dropped quickly, and I wrapped my arms around my knees, shivering. Every sound in the forest seemed magnified. The snap of a branch, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of what I hoped was a coyote. I kept my flashlight on, but the beam seemed weak and small against the darkness. As the hours passed, I started to hear things that didn't make sense. Voices, faint and far away, calling my name. I knew it couldn't be my friends, they were too far away, and the voices sounded strange, distorted. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the fear was real, and it grew with every passing minute. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to the sound of something moving nearby. I sat up, heart pounding, and shone my flashlight into the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the light, but when I blinked, they were gone. I listened, holding my breath, but the only sound was the wind in the branches. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion took over. I drifted in and out of sleep, waking every time I heard a noise. The cold seeped into my bones, and I started to worry about hypothermia. I remembered reading that you should keep moving to stay warm, so I got up and paced in circles, trying to keep my blood flowing. As the sky began to lighten, I felt a surge of hope. I climbed a small hill, hoping to get a better view, and finally spotted the lake through the trees. I made my way toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks, until I reached the water's edge. I followed the shoreline, and after what felt like hours, I saw smoke rising in the distance. My friend's campfire. When I stumbled into camp, my friends were frantic. They'd been searching for me all night, calling my name, but I'd never heard them. I was exhausted, cold, and shaken, but I was safe. We packed up and hiked out that morning, and I've never been so happy to see a car in my life. Looking back, I still don't know what I heard in the woods that night. Maybe it was just animals, or the wind, or my own fear playing tricks on me. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear those voices, calling my name from somewhere deep in the trees. Surviving a night in the wilderness changes you. It makes you realize how fragile you are, how quickly things can go wrong, and how lucky you are to make it out alive.
If you've ever spent a night in the wilderness, you know that the darkness out there is different. It's not just the absence of light, it's a living thing, pressing in on all sides, swallowing every sound and movement. My name's Rachel, and I never thought I'd have to fight for my life in the middle of nowhere. But one night in the Utah desert taught me more about fear, hope, and survival than I ever wanted to know. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. My boyfriend, Matt, and I had been planning it for months, a weekend getaway to celebrate our anniversary. We both loved hiking and had done plenty of day trips, but this was our first time camping overnight, just the two of us. We picked a spot in a remote part of a national park, far from the crowds and the noise of the city. The plan was to hike in, set up camp, and spend a night under the stars. The first day went perfectly. We hiked for hours, taking in the red rock canyons and the endless blue sky. We found a secluded spot near a small stream, pitched our tent, and cooked dinner over a camp stove. As the sun set, the desert turned gold and pink, and the air cooled quickly. We sat by the fire, talking and laughing, feeling like the only two people in the world. After the fire died down, we crawled into the tent and fell asleep to the sound of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a strange noise, a low, rhythmic thumping, like someone beating a drum far away. I lay there, listening, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or an animal. But the sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right outside the tent. I nudged Matt awake. He listened for a moment, then unzipped the tent and shone his flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught nothing but rocks and sagebrush. The thumping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. We waited, holding our breath, but the sound didn't come back. Eventually, Matt zipped up the tent and we tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I lay awake, listening to every sound, every rustle of the wind. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps, soft, shuffling, moving around the tent. I sat up, heart pounding, and whispered to Matt. He listened, then grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent again. This time, the light caught something, a pair of eyes, reflecting back at us from the edge of the campsite. At first, I thought it was a coyote or a deer, but the eyes were too high off the ground, too far apart. Matt called out, but there was no response. The eyes disappeared, and the footsteps faded into the night. We sat there, frozen, listening to the silence. After a while, Matt zipped up the tent and told me to try to sleep, but I couldn't. I lay there, wide awake, waiting for the footsteps to come back. Just before dawn, I heard the thumping again, louder than before. It sounded like it was coming from all around us, echoing off the canyon walls. I grabbed Matt's arm and we both sat up listening. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by a deep guttural growl. We looked at each other, terrified, and decided we couldn't wait for morning. We packed up our things as quickly as we could, shoving everything into our backpacks. As we started hiking out, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the desert. We moved quickly, barely speaking, both of us glancing over our shoulders every few minutes. The trail seemed different in the early light, more twisted, more confusing. We lost our way twice, doubling back until we found the stream and followed it out of the canyon. When we finally reached the trailhead, We were exhausted, dirty, and shaken. We drove home in silence, both of us trying to process what had happened. We never figured out what made those sounds, or what was watching us from the darkness. Maybe it was just an animal, or maybe it was something else. All I know is that I've never been so scared in my life. For weeks after, I had nightmares about the desert, the thumping, the eyes, the feeling of being watched. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced that something was outside my window. Matt tried to reassure me, telling me it was just my imagination, but I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen. We never went camping again. I still love the outdoors, but I stick to day hikes now. Always with a group, always close to civilization. I learned that night that the wilderness is beautiful, but it's also unpredictable, unforgiving. You can do everything right, bring the right gear, follow the trail, check the weather, and still find yourself in a situation you can't control. Surviving a night in the wilderness isn't just about being prepared. It's about staying calm, trusting your instincts, and never underestimating the power of fear. I'm grateful we made it out, grateful for the lessons I learned, but I'll never forget the feeling of being alone in the dark, surrounded by something I couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't escape.
There's a kind of silence in the wilderness that you can't find anywhere else. It's not peaceful? Not really. It's the kind of silence that makes you realize how far you are from help, from comfort, from anything familiar. My name is Miguel, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to survive a night alone in the wild. But sometimes life throws you into situations you never imagined, and all you can do is hope you make it out. I grew up in a big city, surrounded by noise and people. The closest I ever got to nature was the city park, and even then I stuck to the paved paths. But after college, I moved to Oregon for a job, and suddenly the outdoors was everywhere. My coworkers were all into hiking, camping, and backpacking. At first I was hesitant, but I didn't want to be left out. So when they invited me on a weekend backpacking trip in the Cascades, I said yes. There were 5 of us, me, my friend Jake, his girlfriend Sarah, and 2 of their friends, Emily and Tom. We planned to hike about 10 miles into the mountains, camp by a lake, and hike back out the next day. I borrowed a backpack and some gear, watched a few YouTube videos about camping, and figured I'd be fine. How hard could it be? The hike in was beautiful. The trail wound through dense forests, across streams, and up into the mountains. The air was crisp and clean, and the views were incredible. We reached the lake by late afternoon, set up our tents, and spent the evening swimming, fishing, and cooking over a campfire. As the sun set, the sky turned orange and pink, and I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. After dinner, we sat around the fire telling stories and laughing. I was starting to feel like maybe I could get used to this. But as the night wore on, the temperature dropped, and the fire died down. One by one, everyone drifted off to their tents. I stayed up a little longer, staring at the stars, listening to the sounds of the forest. That's when I heard it. A distant howl, echoing through the trees. At first I thought it was a coyote, but then I heard another, closer this time. I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided it was time to call it a night. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the door, and tried to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, maybe going to the bathroom. But the footsteps were slow, deliberate, circling my tent. I held my breath, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was only silence. Then something brushed against the side of my tent. I froze, too scared to move. I could hear breathing, heavy, ragged, just a few feet away. I reached for my flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I turned it on and shone it at the tent wall, but all I could see was the fabric glowing in the light. The breathing stopped, and the footsteps moved away. I lay there, wide awake, listening to every sound. I wanted to call out to my friends, but I was too scared to make a noise. I lay there for what felt like hours, waiting for the sun to rise. When sun finally came, I stumbled out of my tent, exhausted and shaken. I told my friends what had happened, but they just laughed and said it was probably a deer or a raccoon. I wanted to believe them, but I knew what I'd heard. We spent the day hiking around the lake, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every time I looked into the trees, I thought I saw movement, shadows slipping between the trunks. I tried to ignore it, tried to enjoy the day, but the fear never really left. That evening, as we were getting ready to cook dinner, Jake realized he'd left his fishing rod at a spot about a mile down the trail. He asked if anyone wanted to go with him to get it, but everyone else was tired. I volunteered, thinking it would be good to get away from camp for a bit, to clear my head. We set off down the trail, talking and joking, but as we got farther from camp, the forest grew darker, quieter. We found the fishing rod where Jake had left it and started back. That's when we heard it, a low growl coming from the trees to our left. We stopped, listening, but the growl came again, closer this time. Jake whispered, "Let's get out of here," and we started walking faster. The growling followed us, moving through the trees, always just out of sight. We broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise. When we finally reached camp, we were both out of breath, hearts pounding. We told the others what had happened, but they still didn't believe us. They said it was probably just a bear or a coyote, nothing to worry about. But I could see the fear in Jake's eyes, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like something lurking just out of sight. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, moving around the camp. I sat up, clutching my flashlight, listening as the footsteps circled the tents, then faded into the distance. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the ground shook. I heard someone scream, Emily, I think, and then chaos. People were shouting, running, flashlights flickering in the darkness. I stumbled out of my tent, trying to see what was happening. In the confusion, I got separated from the group. I called out, but no one answered. I realized I was alone, deep in the forest, with no idea which way was back to camp. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trees all looked the same in the dark. My phone had no signal, and my flashlight was starting to die. I fought back panic, telling myself to stay calm, to find a place to wait for morning. I found a large rock and sat down, wrapping my arms around my knees. The forest was alive with sounds, branches snapping, leaves rustling, distant howls. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion took over. I drifted in and out of sleep, waking every time I heard a noise. At some point, I heard voices, my friends calling my name. I shouted back, but they didn't hear me. I tried to follow the sound, but I kept getting turned around, stumbling through the underbrush. The night seemed endless, the darkness absolute. As the sky began to lighten, I finally found the trail. I followed it, hoping it would lead me back to camp. After what felt like hours, I saw smoke rising in the distance. I ran toward it, tripping over roots and rocks, until I burst into the clearing where my friends were waiting. They were relieved to see me, but shaken. They said something had crashed through the camp in the night, scattering everyone. They'd spent hours searching for me, calling my name, but I never heard them. We packed up and hiked out as soon as the sun was up, all of us eager to leave the forest behind. I still don't know what was out there that night. Maybe it was just an animal, or maybe it was something else. All I know is that I was never truly alone in the wilderness. The fear, the uncertainty, the sense of being watched, it stays with you long after you're safe. Surviving a night in the wild isn't just about having the right gear or knowing the right skills. It's about staying calm, trusting your instincts, and never underestimating the power of the unknown. I'm grateful I made it out, grateful for the friends who didn't give up on me, but I'll never forget the silence, the darkness, and the feeling that something was always just out of sight.